everyone, my name is Sarah Cahill, and today I want to go ahead and take you through the December 2020 updates. As I'm expecting in April, we're going to get a whole another set of new updates, as usually EDM comes out with typically each quarter kind of a new set of massive updates. So I want to make sure everyone's aware of everything before that happens. Hopefully now in April. Um, okay, so the way that I've structured this is completely 100% disclaimer, my opinions. I didn't want this to be just me reading off the updates from a list, which you could do on your own. So I've organized this into what I'm calling good updates, great updates, and fantastic updates. So these are all, depending on the user, I'm sure fantastic updates. Pretty much if it's a good update in this presentation, I probably am not using it. And if it's a fantastic update, then I'm probably using it. So disclaimer, just 100% my opinion. This is the way that I've structured this presentation. So again, these are the December 2020 updates. Just want to get everyone refreshed before the new set of updates hit us. All right, and just very quickly, a brief slide over InterRel. We are the 5-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year, several awards, several experts. We offer full services, cloud, training, support. We have key partnerships, and we're very, very, very experienced. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with what I am calling good updates. So there's a new appearance option called Redwood. If you guys are familiar, and I'm assuming that if you're watching this presentation, which is about EDM updates, that you are familiar with EDM itself. If you are familiar, then you know that the current or the previous background options were kind of the dark blue and then the cloud blue, which is a lighter blue. And then the different icons are very colorful. So I personally love the colorfulness. I like it personally. It's just personally what I prefer. I also think it's easier to navigate because there's the different colors to distinguish the different cards or icons. So I like the colorful option better, but I could see maybe someone's more they want to maybe they think this looks a little more professional because it's not as colorful. For example, excuse me, the current client that I'm on is doing a planning cloud implementation as well, and they use this Redwood appearance option. So should the client decide they want to go with that appearance option and have EDM and planning cloud look the same, they have that option now. So this is a good update. All right, so expressions, if you've been using EDM, and I assume you are, if or you have in the past or are learning, you know that some of the expressions on different property types are very limited, and some you couldn't do expressions at all. So now we've added the ability to do expressions on integer and date type properties. So this is really awesome. The only reason this is in the good category and not the great or fantastic is because it's still a little limited. There aren't very many expressions or as many as you could do on, for example, a string type property. And there's an update in either the great or fantastic section later that I'll discuss to assist with that. But this is really good. This is a great starting point. At least you can now do an expression on integer and date properties. That's awesome. All right, alternate qualifiers. It allows you so you can compare your different nodes or members between different viewpoints that have different qualifiers, which is either a prefix or a suffix. So I know your EPM Hyperion applications typically like to have, it's usually a prefix to for a numbered member, so that it's easier to pull within SmartView. So if you had viewpoints with different prefixes, maybe someone wants to have the prefix be AC, another person have it be A. This can be very helpful. The only reason this is in the good category for me, personally, I don't typically use the qualifier here. I usually use a converter on the name because most of my hierarchies have parents that aren't numbers. And I don't want the prefix on my textual parents, or it would look a little weird. So I typically don't use the qualifier here. But if you had a whole structure, a whole hierarchy with numbers, including parents, this would be where I would use the qualifier. And then now you have this alternate qualifiers option. All right, so I'm sure there's someone out here that this is a fantastic update. I have not ran into a client yet that can't use Excel. Excuse me. But apparently now you can use REST API to kind of get around that if you can't use Excel. Maybe you don't have a license or your client doesn't. And this can also be used to automate incremental changes. So I have this in the good section. But I do think I have a little bit more homework to research this on. Incremental changes, I've been using previously merge imports, but maybe this is something that I need to look into because the documentation does say it can be used to automate incremental changes, which makes sense to create a request file. So this could end up TBD, to be determined, because we love our acronyms in my great or fantastic section. But for right now, I haven't done enough research on this. All right, document ID from API export to FCGL connection. So typically when I'm implementing EDM for a client that has an ERP solution, if it's an EPM or Hyperion application and I can use EPM Automate to do all the automations, then I do that. But for ERP, I really rely on the client after just exporting the file and kind of giving it to them to figure out how to kind of import that into their particular, in this case, Fusion or Financials Cloud General Ledger application. So I don't have too much background on what this is, but it's actually a little funny. I think this may have come from a previous client of mine that used Fusion. We used the direct connection in EDM, and they actually decided to go a different route. So I think this is supposed to be better than it was before. So that's really good. All right, and then incremental dimension export using REST API. This would be in the fantastic section if it was for hierarchical viewpoints. But I've read that this is for list viewpoints only, but maybe this is a stepping stone to get this for hierarchical viewpoints, and that would be really awesome. All right, so next section, let's go to what I am calling great updates. Okay, so I think this is a little bit more intuitive for the users. Previously, you could only add properties within the application registration, but now you can go to the properties card and just click create and add properties from here. And I think this might have been done in conjunction with another feature that I'll be discussing later in this session. But this is really great. The only thing you have to be cognizant of, so you could create custom properties here and then go and add it to the node type. But this means it's not going to be bound to the application. So just keep that in mind. If you want a new property to be bound to the application, like a universal or previously called custom application, then you would want to add that property within the application registration and not from this screen and then to the node type. But this is still really cool. I think this is an easier way and a little more intuitive way to create your different properties. All right, global connections to Oracle Object Storage. I've gotten very lucky on this project, and my good friend Wayne Vansluis is actually committed to data integration, so I'm not having to build any of my integrations. And I think he actually might be using this to connect to EBS. So this is another one that's to be determined, TBD, that might end up in the fantastic updates. So I'll let Wayne work through this and figure it out and then let me know. So again, to be determined, this could be a really great, fantastic update. I haven't worked with it enough to have found it useful at this point in time, but I am sure I will. All right, upgrade planning to planning modules. So the benefit of this is if you had a planning application, maybe from kind of the old world PBCS, and now you're trying to get into Planning Cloud, which uses kind of the old ePBCS planning modules framework, where basically you can insert different sections of the hierarchies beneath predefined members within planning. So if you have the planning modules application versus planning, then you can have a column that says operation, and it'll be, if you tag it as reposition only, and this has to be done within an import, by the way, then you can have it to where users in EDM can't update those members, which is great because they can't update them in planning. So you don't want them to try and update them in EDM. And it does say be careful, you can't undo this. I don't think it's too terrible of a risk. You don't have to tag anything as reposition only if you don't want to, even if you did do this. But I think this is a great option for people who created a planning app and now they're kind of using the out-of-the-box functionality and they want this planning modules functionality. All right, data type conversion methods and expressions. So this one is great. This is actually a real example that I'm using at my client right now. So if you use the format option, for example, it's going to convert your date to a formatted string. So that's the exact example that you see right here. I basically wanted to say if they disable something, or if your end date is not null. They have an is null right now, but not an is not null. So what I did is I took the end date and then I formatted it to a string. And then I said if its length is greater than or equal to 1, basically meaning if it's not blank. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I couldn't convert this date to a formatted string in order to accomplish that. And then there's also the toDate to convert a string back to a date. So that one's pretty cool if you wanted to go back kind of backwards opposite to what I just said. There's your toInteger, which converts your string to an integer. And then your integer to a string, so kind of the opposite of the toInteger. So these are really cool, and I've already found a use case for this first format one. All right, user preferences, locale. So I could see, this hasn't affected me personally, but I could definitely see users, overseas and anywhere else, maybe having trouble if things are not set in their language, date, time, or numerical values, how they're used to seeing things. So I think this is really cool. I think it's going to expand the audience of EDM and also make EDM just easier to use for a broader audience. So I think this is really great. So lock property values on request commit. So I personally haven't used this yet, but I could definitely see a use case for this, or this coming up as a requirement from a future client, where basically you maybe have an admin or someone seed a property one time, and then it's locked down and you can't update it in the future. So maybe, for example, description. They want the admin to go in and give a description and then never let an end user touch the description field ever again. So I don't have this client, I don't have this requirement at my current client, but I could definitely see this coming up in the future. All right, and on to the best section of all. We're going to go through what I consider to be fantastic updates. All right, so we finally have support for attribute dimensions in our EPM Cloud applications. So previously, how I would do this in my universal or what was called custom application is that I'd create a node type property, and then I'd actually create a dimension for the attribute dimension, and then I'd point that node type property to that dimension. But that was just in my universal or my custom app. Now you can do this in your EPM Cloud applications, and it's less manual. You kind of just tell it, there's two options. You can have a simple attribute or a hierarchical attribute. So this allows you to easily maintain kind of an attribute dimension for your EPM apps, kind of the same way as you would manage it within those EPM applications, where you'd have your application dimension and you could you set that based on a hierarchy, and then you can have your property point to it. So if you want this in your custom or universal application, you'll still create it the same way I just described with a node template, and then have a different dimension for the hierarchy and point that property to it. But this is really great for your EPM Cloud applications. You now just tell it, hey, I have a hierarchical attribute, and it'll kind of create this all for you, and then you can go see the structure. All right, collaboration on subscriptions. So this is awesome. If you're using kind of, for my example, kind of a mastering concept, and you have a master or your primary central application for some of your updates, and then those get pushed out to other places. As I'm sure a lot of you know, that's accomplished with subscriptions within EDM. And so now you have this collaborate feature. So what you could do is, for example, say maybe your planning app within EDM, maybe there's 2 planning admins. So you don't just want the default assignee, you could have alternate assignees. And then if you click collaborate, it's automatically going to invite however many the alternate assignees that you have beneath. So that way you're all just invited to assist in updating properties or whatever needs to be done. You can auto collaborate. Went backwards. All right, system activity reports. So these are great. If I did a screenshot of everything within these activity reports, it would take up a whole bunch of slides. So I encourage you to go through and look at this report. There's so much information. So this is going to be very helpful for your service administrators. So I'll go ahead, and I have the list here of everything that this shows. So it shows you the number of user metrics, which you can see here in this screenshot, as well as percentage of user interface requests over 2 seconds. You can also see your top 7 UI requests by total duration, your top 15 user interface requests by execution, and then your top 30 worst performing user interface actions over 2 seconds, your users' average responses time by hour, number of user interface requests by hour, CPU usage, memory usage, application size, number of users by usage duration, top 10 most active users by usage duration, 10 least active users by usage duration, browser version usage, and last but not least, EPM Automate versions in use. So it's a very colorful, exciting report. I encourage you all to go and run it. You just click on the reports card, and it's down here under System Activity Report and look at all the information that it can give a service administrator. All right, so this one is really, really, really awesome, and I'm using it a ton at my current client. So it's called Calculate and Store, but just think of how you set up a derived property, and this is kind of the same way. So you go to the property, and then you can calculate in the parent property, and you can calculate and store a parent. So this is only going to calculate and store it if the parent is blank. So for example, if you have a list node set, you can have it calculate, for example, based on a different property or whatnot. So this is something that I'm using a ton at my current client. It's really cool and very helpful. Okay, so this is another one that I think is really fantastic, of course, because it's in the fantastic section, but now your owners of your applications can update properties. So for example, I'll give you my current use case at my current client. They want to maintain a certain list of values that can be used, and they don't want to have to rely on their service administrators to have to go in and update those lists anytime they need to be updated, so they can go in and do that. And then we're calling these the functional admins. So this is very helpful that they can go in and update these properties as well. All right, so string list properties and methods in expressions. So sometimes you want to create a list type property, so not to be confused with a string type property and then having that little check mark that just says use an allowed valued list. This is actually a list type property, which means you just go through and it's kind of cute, check mark, kind of which pieces that you want, and then those all kind of just show up within the same properties separated by commas. So I like that. I like the little checklist, and I've been waiting on this feature. So now they've in expressions allowed you to use expressions on these list type properties. So this is actually a live example in a subscription from my current client that uses a list type property. So we kind of have a mastering concept, and then we check mark which EDM applications we want the update to go to, the nodes to go to. So I'm really excited about this update. I've been waiting on this. All right, and last but definitely not least, I actually added it last because it's my absolute favorite, extracts for dimension viewpoints. So basically you can run this for any viewpoint, doesn't have to be the bound one. So that's huge. It's also huge because it's kind of like a custom export that I'm sure we've all been waiting on. So how it works is you first set up your format, exactly what do you want to be included, excluded. So it's really, really nice. You set up your different formatting options, and you can run the extract then, and it's very similar to like a custom export. So I've been waiting on this one for forever, and I'm so glad that it's here. I would love it if Oracle would add it to EPM Automate to make my life a little easier. Right now it's not within EPM Automate, so you could extract it using REST API. So you could basically automate almost a custom export with this new run extract option. So this is probably my favorite option out of everything that we've discussed. So very, very great. So and that brings us to the end of the presentation. So the next updates I'm assuming are going to happen in April. So we'll just need to keep an eye out for those, read up on them. I definitely encourage you to check back and see what type of updates are being made in EDM. If there's something that you think can't be accomplished, um, just rerun through those updates again, because it might have something in there to get you what you need. So good job, Oracle. I can't wait to see what Oracle comes up with next. And thank you all for attending. Have a good one. Bye.